Welcome, everyone. This is Carla Gagnon. I'm a Senior Program and Project Specialist in AmeriCorps State and National, and my work focuses on performance measurement and evaluation. I'm here today with Mary High from the Office of Research and Evaluation, and we want to talk with you about our efforts this past year to understand the evaluation capacity of our grantees, and also about our plan for providing additional training and technical assistance going forward related to helping grantees meet the evaluation requirements. So Mary helped lead up the effort to do some research into how our grantees were doing and what their current capacity was related to evaluation, and she's going to talk about that, and then I'm going to talk about what our plans are going forward for training and technical assistance. So I will turn it over to Mary.
Thanks, Carla. As Carla said, we have been working together to better understand the needs of folks around how to meet the requirements of CNCS to conduct evaluations, but also more broadly to just expand capacity so that folks can use evaluation to improve their own program operations on the ground. So what we're going to share with you today are the results of 4 key activities, and our hope is that at the conclusion of the webinar, you will have a better understanding of where folks are regarding their current evaluation capacity, as well as a better understanding of what our strategy is to help build the field's evaluation capacity. So in order to better understand where folks are, we have engaged in 4 primary activities in the past several months, starting late fall of 2012 and carrying us through late spring of 2013. And it's those activities that we're going to describe today, as well as some of the things that we learned as a result of engaging in these activities. I'm going to be mentioning in a couple of these slides a group called NORC, which stands for the National Opinion Research Center. They are a contractor with the agency, and they are working with us as part of the larger team to support our evaluation guidance efforts here. So when you see NORC on some of these slides, that's who they are. They're a third-party contractor, and they conducted some of these activities on our behalf. So the 4 main things that we've been engaging in are some strategic discussions with some state service commissions as well as national direct grantees. We also reviewed the evaluation plans and reports that were submitted this year as part of the GARP process. We conducted a focus group with some of the program officers last fall, and we have also conducted an inventory of the evaluation resources and tools that are currently available.
Hi, Mary. This is Liz. I apologize for the interruption.
Quite all right.
There's been some complaints about feedback noise and buzzing sound.
I'm hearing it too.
Okay, so I'm going to try to mute all, and if you don't mind unmuting your phone, that'd be. Let's try that.
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Okay, Mary and Carla, please press *6 on your phone.
We just pressed it. Can you hear me?
Yes, this is much better.
All right. Okay, so apologies for that. So let me just go back, since there was such bad feedback, and quickly just recap that there are going to be 4 primary activities that we're going to be talking about today, and the things that we've learned as a result of those activities. And again, just to recap quickly, one of the activities was a series of telephone conversations that we had with some state service commissions as well as national direct grantees. The second activity that we're going to be talking about today is a review of the evaluation plans and reports that were submitted as part of this year's GARP process. We'll also talk a little bit about what we learned as a result of a focus group that was conducted with AmeriCorps program officers in late fall, early December of 2012. And we'll just talk very briefly about an inventory that's been conducted on current evaluation resources and tools that are available to grantees. So those are the 4 activities, and the slide that you should see in front of you right now really starts to get us a little bit more deeply into the first activity, which was a series of discussions that we've had with the field. What you see in this chart is just basically who we spoke with, so you have a sense of the representativeness of these findings, but basically we spoke with 19 different organizations, and these conversations were conducted in March and April of 2013. As you can see from the table, 14 were with AmeriCorps grantees and 5 were with state service commissions. Regarding the grant size, you'll see that we have a column for large and a column for small. Large simply refers to folks who are receiving, on average, $500,000 or more a year. Small refers to organizations that are receiving less than $500,000 a year. Again, with these 19 organizational representatives, we asked a series of key discussion questions, and these were the questions that were asked. I want to emphasize that while these questions focus on the ability of grantees to meet the evaluation requirements of the agency, of course, evaluation has multiple purposes, and we hope that you are using both performance measurement and program evaluation for multiple purposes. But the focus of these conversations were really about where folks are with their ability to meet current requirements in terms of evaluation. So these 4 questions were asked, and in essence, we'll walk through what we heard back as a result. So we heard pretty clearly that those who participated in these conversations have a relatively limited knowledge of some very basic evaluation methodology and concepts. So that was important for us to understand, so it will help guide the technical assistance and guidance that we'll provide in the coming year. Both National Direct grantees and State Service Commission staff are relatively unclear about the evaluation requirements of the agency, particularly around when various products are due, their plans versus their reports. We also heard that both National Direct grantees and State Service Commission staff would like better guidance in how to determine which evaluation designs will allow them to demonstrate their project impact as well as be in compliance with our requirements. We learned also, as conversations sort of emerged and went beyond the core discussion themes, that in many cases, grantees are not allocating sufficient funds to conduct either experimental or quasi-experimental evaluations, which are the 2 designs that allow for compliance with the regulations that are in place. We also heard that there is some confusion distinguishing between what performance measurement and performance monitoring is versus what program evaluation is. And we also heard that grantees would like access to resources other than their local evaluator for advice on their evaluations. So these are sort of the key synthesized findings that we heard back across all of these 19 phone conversations. And as Carla will discuss a little bit later in the webinar, this has been used to inform our strategies for how we're going to help clarify some of this, deepen understanding, and provide you with the resources that will be needed to better understand some of these things. So that was the first activity. As I mentioned a little earlier, the second main activity that we did as part of our assessment efforts was to take a close look at what evaluation plans and reports were submitted as part of this year's grant review application process. So the way in which we divided this task was the research and evaluation staff here at the agency looked at 33 of the small grantees' plans and reports that were submitted, and the NORC team, which I introduced a little bit earlier, reviewed 23 of the applicants who were receiving $500,000 or more a year and assessed their evaluation plans and reports. To do this assessment, we actually had a form that we used that looked at various categories of the plans and the reports so that we were systematically looking for the same information and the same types of information. And so the next couple of slides really provide you all with a sense of what we were looking for in terms of what a good plan might include or what a good report might include. So the first thing we were looking for was a very clear description of what the intervention or the program is that would be evaluated, and that would include a very clear problem or issue statement as well as a program impact theory. That could be something that's talked about as a theory of change or even depicted in a logic model. We were also looking for clearly articulated evaluation questions and objectives for the evaluation that was planned or completed, including enough information about a methodology or research design, as well as the type of outcomes that were going to be assessed and measured, that we had a good understanding of whether or not, at the end of this endeavor, requirements would be met. In addition, we looked a little bit about the detail of the data collection methodology and procedures, specifically what types and sources of data were going to be collected, whether or not a full population or a sample was going to be used as part of the evaluation, and any plans around the type of data analysis that would be conducted. And then finally, we were interested in looking at the evaluation results and the types of conclusions that were drawn. For the plans, of course, we were mostly interested in looking at how grantees were planning to use the results once they were obtained, and then for reports, we were very curious in knowing what conclusions were made based on the data and any discussion of any limitations that the evaluation design had. What we found as a result of this review was that very few folks met the expectations of what we would expect to find in an evaluation plan, so that we could make an assessment about whether or not this was going to be on track as the evaluation unfolded. So as you see here on the screen, most evaluation reports did not meet CNCS evaluation requirements as defined in the CFR, and by that, that's largely around design. Most of what was talked about were performance measures or maybe some member surveys, but very few, if any, conversation about experimental or quasi-experimental design. Evaluation plans did not describe evaluations that would be capable of determining program impact, so if just a plan was submitted, there was typically no conversation about a design that would allow you to make statements that were in compliance with the CFR guidelines. And many grantees seem to, again, equate performance measurement and monitoring with program evaluation. So in some cases, there was a very, very sound description of a performance management plan based on performance measures, but it was not an evaluation design that would meet requirements. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides here. So again, while almost none of the plans or reports would qualify to meet current evaluation requirements, we did find a lot of promising capacity out there in the field, and we wanted to make sure we emphasized that and talked about that today, because I think it's really important to understand that for many, there's not that much further to go in terms of being ready to conduct a more rigorous evaluation. And so a couple of things that I wanted to point out in terms of emerging capacity and signs that there is some infrastructure in place to conduct evaluations that would meet requirements are captured in the next couple of slides. So foundational to program evaluation, research, or even performance measurement is a very solid theory of change that connects very explicitly what a community issue or need is, what the program's resources are to address it, what the activities are that are expected to actually impact this change, as well as outputs and outcomes. And so many of the plans and reports and applications that we read had very clearly defined theories of change, and that is a very good foundation and basis for building evaluation and performance measure systems around. Also, many applicants described program models that were informed by evidence. So while there may not be an evidence-based program evaluation design in place, many applicants are very intentional about integrating evidence into their programs so that it's a very solidly evidence-informed program, whether that is using their own past program performance data, whether it's using peer-reviewed research on similar practices, activities, or models, or whether or not they're implementing a solidly researched national model at a local level. A lot of folks were very articulate about how their efforts are grounded in research, even if they did not then go on to identify an evaluation plan or report or design that would allow them to evaluate their specific locally implemented program. In addition to these capacities, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, many of the applicants that we reviewed described very reasonable pre-post program outcomes, had very solid data sources for assessing and tracking these outcomes. And in some cases, applicants were looking post the program to see how participants were doing down the road, whether it was 6 months out or a year out. All of the evaluation reports or summaries that we did look at, with the exception of one, I think, really focused on and described what would be considered good formative or process evaluation. Again, these types of evaluation designs do not meet the requirements, but they are very good practice, and they provide very good infrastructure for building off of those designs. And by what I mean by process or formative evaluations, these evaluations really look at a program's operations, their daily operations. Are you actually serving the intended population that you were set up to serve? Are you delivering the core program activities that you intended to or had planned to deliver in a way that you had articulated? So, number of workshops, whatever your program model is it actually being delivered and unfolded in the way that you had planned? And then, of course, this is where, you would want to start to get some preliminary evidence that you are having the change that you think you're going to have by looking at your performance outcomes. Are there patterns that suggest preliminary positive changes occurring as a result of folks coming through your program? All of this is sort of lumped into process or formative evaluation, and it's an important way in which you can look at whether or not you're implementing what it is you thought you were implementing. With respect to some of the larger grantees and their plans and their reports, very consistent. They also lacked detail on the whole that would allow us to make any determination about whether or not the design that was planned was going to end up meeting our requirements. And again, most of these reports, in retrospect, did not describe evaluations that could really get at program impact definitively, because an experimental or quasi-experimental design had not been implemented. So it's promising, as well as with the small grantees, the large grantees, seem to be moving in the right directions. They're gathering pre-post data. They're looking at a little bit of follow-up data, and a handful, are indeed implementing experimental or quasi-experimental designs. So, again, the message is, while most folks are not there, there seems to be enough movement in the right direction and enough emerging capacity or some preliminary capacity that we think that with the proper supports we can get most of you where you need to be. So that was the second primary activity. First, we chatted with some folks directly about what their understanding of these ideas were and where they were in their ability to meet requirements. Then we looked at these actual plans and reports and tried to do an assessment of where folks seem to be. In addition to that, as I mentioned, there was a focus group convened with program officers where we asked these questions. NORC, the team I mentioned earlier, actually conducted these focus groups for us as a third party. And so these were the discussion themes, and this is what folks talked about as part of this focus group. And what we heard and what was pretty consistent across these activities is that, in general, both program officers and grantees are very interested in learning more about evaluation and evidence. Folks have a desire to increase their awareness and understanding of the evaluation requirements, what's due when. So we heard very consistent themes throughout both of these activities. In addition to the phone conversations, the reviews, and the focus group, the NORC team also took a look at the resources that currently reside on the Knowledge Network, because part of what we'd like to do in the coming year or two is to organize and update and provide some additional information, but we wanted to very systematically take a look at what was there. And so that was done, and there was a systematic method and the way in which the NORC team went about looking at these resources. So we just wanted to make folks aware that we have taken a look and we are aware of some of the gaps that exist in the resources and tools currently available. Specifically, what was noticed to be lacking was that there is not a very easy, consolidated, central place to access this information as the Knowledge Network is currently organized. So it may be there, but you may have to take a couple steps to get to it. One of the things we also got feedback on was that the resources are a bit dated and were not always reflective of the most current thinking in terms of evaluation practice. And specific informational gaps, which folks felt like would be useful to the field, are guidance around evaluation planning, evaluation management, data analysis, and the use of existing data. So in essence, what we're planning to do is to take all of this assessment information, all of our assessment findings, and create a strategy that will basically help build capacity to conduct evaluation at a local level and to meet the requirements that the agency has. And what Carla is going to talk about next is sort of a top-level overview of the strategy that we've identified as a way to help move everyone along in the way that they need to be moved along. So I'm going to hand it over to Carla now.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. So we were really excited to have had that level of analysis. I think it confirmed what we sort of knew anecdotally, but it really also helped us think about where we should best focus our training and technical assistance efforts. So I'm going to talk about our plan for the future and how we hope to help grantees understand our evaluation requirements better, understand evaluation, and have the tools that they need to be able to meet our requirements. So the first piece of our plan was to disseminate a list of new evaluation FAQs. You should have received that a couple of weeks ago. We have released it to the public, and I think it does a pretty good job of answering a lot of the common questions that folks have about our evaluation requirements. The next step of the plan is a couple of webinars this summer, and so today is the first of a two-part series of webinars. So we're looking today at evaluation capacity building, and then our next webinar planned for early September is about the CNCS evaluation requirements and the FAQs. So you've gotten the FAQs. You'll have time to take a look at them, to see if there are still areas that you're not clear about, that if you still have questions about the evaluation requirements, and then you can join, you can join one of these webinars about the evaluation requirements and the FAQs, both to hear an overview of the requirements and to get any lingering questions that you might have answered. So the next step is for us to create a central location for evaluation materials on the website. We have a temporary solution. This call is being recorded, for instance, and we're going to be putting this call and the recording and the slides from this call on a piece of the evaluation, a section of the evaluation website. So you'll be getting a URL following up from this call with information about where to access the recording, and that will be our temporary location for placing new evaluation materials until we're able to create a new evaluation landing page. Those of you who are familiar with our performance measurement landing page are aware that we have one central performance measurement page for AmeriCorps where you can go that is then a portal to resources, to the performance measurement core curriculum, to lots of other materials related to performance measurement. And so our hope is to create something similar for evaluation so that you have a landing page that you can go to, which will take you everywhere else you need to get the resources that you're interested in for evaluation. The next step of the plan involves the Grantee Symposium in September, and we are having a performance measurement and evaluation track. So in the past, we've had a performance measurement track. This year, our focus is really much more on evaluation. We do have a performance measurement pre-conference workshop, which is happening in a 4-hour block on the first day of the conference. But beyond that, we're really focusing our efforts on evaluation during that body of the actual Grantee Symposium. So during the symposium, we will be offering workshops on developing evaluation plans and reports. There will be one workshop for grantees who have a CNCS share of $500,000 or greater. There will be another workshop for small grantees who are less than $500,000. And then we'll be doing an Evaluation 101 session. And this will be our first opportunity to sort of do a 101 level about some of the basic evaluation concepts that will help you better understand our requirements. We also have a plan to provide some individualized technical assistance in developing evaluation plans because we want we want to make sure that grantees have successful plans in place so that when we get to GARP, whatever year you happen to be moving into GARP, you've started out with a successful plan. So we feel like if we can focus on a successful plan, then we have a better chance of getting an evaluation that meets our requirements when the time is right for that. So we're going to be providing some individualized technical assistance over the next few months as well. And then lastly, we'll be working to develop an evaluation core curriculum. And so we want to develop something similar to the performance measurement core curriculum. So we would envision having some online courses, some webinars, and downloadable resources covering topics like developing evaluation plans and reports, 101 level topics in evaluation, logic models, how to report evaluation findings, how to manage an external evaluation if you fall into that category, and how to budget appropriately for an evaluation. So we are working on fleshing out all of those, and it'll take some time for us to develop those resources, but over the next year or two, we really want to focus some of our TA efforts on developing this core curriculum. Okay. So that's the end of our presentation, and now we want to answer questions if you have been listening and have questions for us. And I think you will need to unmute your phone to do that.
Carla, this is Liz. I just got a chat message.
Okay.
Are there examples of successful plans or reports using quasi or fully experimental design?
We don't have any examples that are publicly available right now, but our plan for the Grantee Symposium is to provide at least a clear outline for what should be in there.
Okay, thanks, Carla. I have a follow-up to the previous question from another participant. This person wants to know, would you please clarify what you mean by the terms experimental/quasi-experimental models?
Sure. So, in general, experimental research design models use random assignment so that participants who are showing up for a particular program or a service, at the time that they sort of walk through your door, they are then randomly assigned to either receive that program or intervention or into a control group where they are not allowed to receive services either for a certain period of time or at all. So experimental, by definition, refers to the use of random assignment, which ensures equivalency between the two groups so that if you see any difference in the outcomes of participants who come through your program, you have a confidence level that is pretty high, depending on certain factors, that the changes are indeed a result of your program, thus the term program impact. So in the most scientific terms, impact has a meaning that is associated and linked closely to the use of experimental design. I realize that people use the term impact on a daily basis, but in scientific circles, when the term program impact is used, they are referring to evidence that has come out of a research study that uses random assignment or an experimental design. Now, a quasi-experimental design means that you get a very good comparison group and you use a number of strategies to also make sure that folks who go through your program and folks who do not go through your program are basically the same kind of folks. You just don't use random assignment to do it. And there's a number of ways that you can do that, and we can get into some of that if folks are interested down the road. But in essence, the main difference is the use of random assignment and no use of random assignment. And in the quasi-experimental designs, you might have a very nice comparison group where you might be looking at folks who are in a similar type of program but not as close to yours as possible and look for differences. And again, your confidence level, depending on how well you've crafted your comparison group, can be pretty high. but it's typically not as rigorous or deemed as high a level of confidence in those program differences as if you use random assignment because of the reliance on, probability and things like that. But in general, probably the main distinction between experimental and quasi-experimental is that experimental uses random assignment, quasi-experimental designs use a comparison group, but they have not been developed through the use of random assignment into that group.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mary. And additional questions coming in. Will the one-on-one assistance proposed be available to state commission subgrantees, i.e. individual state programs?
Typically, that has not been a level of technical assistance that we have been able to provide, but I think that we could definitely provide one-on-one assistance to a state commission in terms of how to work with a particular subgrantee.
Is the PowerPoint available for us to use with our subgrantees at this point?
It will be available shortly after the call.
Okay.
We'll let you know when it's online.
Will CNCS provide feedback on previously submitted grantee evaluations and whether or not they meet CFR guidelines?
So the current plan, just because of sort of our own resources, is that grantees who were at the $500,000 and above level, who will be working with our external contractor, they will get some feedback simply to inform the technical assistance that is moving forward. I am not certain if we're able to share the feedback for smaller grantees, but I think, given the findings that Mary shared, I think it's pretty safe to say only a couple of folks were able to submit plans and reports that met requirements.
And perhaps it's important to note, I don't know if you've had this in other conversations, Carla, but our review of people's plans and reports were not part of any decision making. This was purely for assessment purposes with the idea of developing this particular strategy in the coming year, the ideas that Carla has just shared, so that we would know how to best meet the needs of the field. So this wasn't something that went into anybody's final score or anything like that. It was purely for our own educational purposes, if you will, so we'd have a sense of where things stood.
Yeah, that's a super important point to make. We didn't figure this in GARP at all, but I think, it's important to note that our intention in the long term is that evaluations are part of the evidence basis that support your program. So our intention in the long term is that grantees are able to submit evaluation reports that contribute to the evidence basis that they have to support their program. So our hope is that going forward over time, we would be able to consider the results of compliant evaluations insofar as they inform and add to the evidence basis for a particular program intervention. But because we just didn't have reports that were able to do that, we had sort of hoped that we might be able to at least consider them in GARP, but we were not able to do that at all, and it did not factor into the scoring at all.
And one shameless plug I'll make right now is there is a research summit that will be part of the Grantee Symposium this fall, and one of the panels in that summit, as currently planned, and planning is still underway, but what we'd ideally like to do is showcase some of the stronger examples, if you will, of not only experimental reports, but quasi-experimental, but also folks who are building their evidence base and have some good infrastructure just based on good practices around performance monitoring and the data that they're using for performance measurement. So this summit will be open to all the grantees participating in the symposium this year, and one of the panels we are trying to design intentionally so that you all can have some good examples from your peers about these different ways of building your evidence base. So while we may not have something to send out right now, we are hoping to have some presentations that sort of start to illustrate within this particular arena what is good and can be emulated in your own work.
Okay, you may have covered this already, but this question asks, will grantees awarded this year be expected to revise their plans, which are likely already underway, if they are not quasi or full experimental, in particular where formative evaluation hasn't yet happened, and would be a vital building block ahead of doing impact evaluation in the future?
So I think it's important that if you have an evaluation plan that will result in an evaluation that doesn't meet our requirements, it's important to change your plan. We are not going to go back to grantees and require them to submit a new plan to us, but I think it's in your best interest to make sure that the plan you have will yield you an evaluation that meets our requirements before it's time to submit that evaluation.
Thanks, Carla. Are you suggesting that the experimental evaluation that students need tutoring would not receive those services if a random selection process is used?
I mean, there's a number of ways that you can achieve random assignment, and depending on the feasibility of where you're working. I'll give you the example that the Minnesota Reading Corps has used in their national evaluation, in which they have used random assignment. So they're implementing tutoring services that AmeriCorps members are implementing, and the way that they did random assignment was they simply said, okay, you're being randomly assigned in the fall based on your reading literacy level, and the control group can start receiving these services the next semester, but they can't receive it this semester. And that worked because the intervention itself is organized around a semester. So a number of things sort of determine how you can implement a random assignment process in a way that fits with your program, whether it's appropriate for the length of your intervention, whether it is appropriate for the setting that you're operating in. But many strategies involve a wait list, if you will. So you deny services for a period of time, but you do not necessarily deny them for forever.
So, but it's important to note, it is very difficult to do random assignments in social services. We are all aware of the challenges of that, and so also that's part of why quasi-experimental design is also an acceptable strategy. So if you can't do a full experimental design, there's also the option to do a quasi-experimental design.
Another waiting list model, just as an example, is not knowing exactly the specifics of the program of the person who put the question forth, but if you have a higher demand than you can meet, a lot of times folks will just put a waiting list in place, and that would become their control group. So, they might have 200 slots, but they get 500 folks who want their services in a given period of time. So you randomly assign, and you simply say to the folks who put into the control group, you're on a waiting list, and that really isn't that different with the reality of the program anyway. So there are different ways that you can do this in some cases, but as Carla said, that's why quasi-experimental also is a way to meet with the requirements. You don't have to do experimental design.
Thanks, Mary.
Yep.
And another participant would like to know more about the grantee symposium, specifically who's invited, when, where it takes place.
So I'll let Mary talk about the when and the where. We are in the process of finalizing who we intend to invite to be panelists. If you're coming to the grantee meeting, we hope you'll stay and attend the symposium, but I'll let Mary talk a little bit more about it.
Right, so I'm not sure if the question was about the symposium, the whole conference in general, or just the research summit. So the research summit is scheduled right now for September 20th. I believe it's from 11:30 to 3. It's that Friday at the end of the larger grantee meeting, and everyone's welcome to participate. In fact, everyone's encouraged to participate. So that's the Research Summit part of the symposium, but I'm not sure what the question
That's right.
is.
Sorry, I was fixated on the Research Summit. So the Grantee Symposium is the event formerly known as the Grantee Meeting, and that's actually required for grantees, and it's happening in September. You should have gotten information about that already. If you haven't, you should talk to your program officer.
And I apologize for jumping around, but I'm taking these as they come in. Where do EAPs fit into this evaluation process, large or small?
I'm just double checking the, I'm just going to be pretty open and honest about this. I'm just double checking the FAQs because believe that we don't require evaluations for EAPs, but I do not want to say that and have it be wrong. So I'm just taking a quick scan of the FAQs to confirm whether or not that's in fact correct. So see, we're all learning here too still.
Should I move on to the next question in the meantime?
Yeah.
Okay. The pros and cons of experimental design are debated heavily in the evaluation field. Is there any discussion within the corporation about movement away from requiring experimental or quasi-experimental design where alternative designs might be more appropriate and justified as such?
There is always discussion. It is a hotly debated topic, and I can only say that as a federal agency, we are in the midst of it as it is happening at the federal level and dictated by the Office of Management and Budget. So OMB is the agency that has oversight responsibility for all federal agencies, of which we are one, and their expectations right now are pretty strongly aligned with experimental and quasi-experimental design. So regardless of where one might fall on that sort of continuum, we are sort of in the midst of that conversation. So yes, there's conversation. Yes, there's recognition that these designs may not be the best designs for all situations, but we also have our marching orders as well.
And I have found the answer, and I was wrong. So I have found the answer to the question about where education award-only programs fall. This is actually, it's in the FAQs. It's in number 1 of the FAQs. And so the requirement for EAP grantees is that they conduct an evaluation. They may use an internal evaluator. So it's the same as for small grantees. It's an internal evaluation.
Okay, thank you. Another participant has a question regarding innovative commission efforts of evaluation subgrantees and would like to share what Florida has implemented in terms of evaluation, focusing on the value added of AmeriCorps members.
Is that a question or a request?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure if that was a question, even though it was stated as a question. Sounds like an offering.
Oh, so perhaps we should follow up with Florida State Commission. Okay, sure,
okay, that's
certainly.
Great. Okay. This person has a comment. The students who are denied tutoring for a semester, that puts that student even further behind than they already are?
That is correct.
That is correct.
That is a limitation of the design.
Again, that's why quasi-experimental is also acceptable.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions that I have. Please let me know if I have overlooked your question. I apologize if I did. Please send it again to me, okay?
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. As you heard me say earlier, we have another call planned for September where we'll be focusing on specific questions about the evaluation requirements and the FAQs. So I hope that you'll be able to join us for that as well. And then I hope that we'll see you at the Grantee Symposium in the measurement and evaluation track.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Mary.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to everyone participating. Have a great day.